Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest in the UVM Extension and Vermont Veg and Berry Growers Association webinar series. Timely topic this week. This is part one of a two-part special on greenhouses and tunnels, talking about startup. And we have two amazing speakers lined up. This week we'll be hearing from Julie Rubaud, and next week we'll be hearing from Jack Mannix. And then in addition to that, you get to suffer through with me as your host for today. So a couple of, like I said, we have part two coming up in the greenhouse series next week, the 14th, with a focus on bedding plants and early season sales. On the 21st, you see, we'll be focused on habitat plantings and pollinators. And on the 28th, we'll be talking about storage crops and seeing what's made it through to February 28th in everybody's coolers, and how things are going and what's working and what isn't. So hope you all are able to join us for that. A reminder that these are recorded and available on the VVBGA YouTube channel pretty shortly after the webinar, thanks to the great work of Andy Chamberlain. I want to thank Becky Madden and Vern Grubiger and the rest of the team for pulling these webinars together and putting together an incredible series and schedule. So one of the things I wanted to highlight for everybody is we do have this resource that actually is just about a year old. It was motivated by the same way many of our resources are motivated. Repeated questions or inquiries or comments on the same theme. And when that happens, I tend to stop and pause and say, let's put something together that collects this, pull the listserv, use other resources. And so we do have one on greenhouse and tunnel startup with a focus on heaters and heater safety. This one in particular, about a year ago, was prompted by a grower that reached out and said, something funny's happening with my heater. And I said, what's happening? And he said, texted the video, and it was a video of the burner tubes with yellow flame rolling out. And I said, yeah, that does not look normal. And it was a good opportunity for both of us to sort of step through a process and a methodology for troubleshooting that. And that's what this resource is meant to help you with, is sort of, it gives you some things to check, some troubleshooting guidance. It points to a couple of existing resources. Rimmel has a wonderful tunnel heater startup checklist in a video form. And this is the video I was telling you about that shows the yellow flame rolling out. So that's all well and good. And I love a good web-based fact sheet as much as anybody else. But I thought maybe we might want to try something different today. And so I've prepared a different delivery format of that resource. And what's great about it is it's a sing-along. And because I'm leading it, the bar is automatically set. You do not need to sing in tune. You do not need to have any talent. You don't need to unmute your mic, but you're welcome to. That would make this kind of wild and chaotic. But let's give it a go. So if you don't have the time or patience to go to the website, you can get the information this way. So here we go. So your seeds, even when it snows.
Leafy greens.
Leafy greens. Patch the poly
holes.
Nose best.
And
Ears and eyes do as well. Propane gas, electric smoke, or burning soot are not things you should smell. Blow the air. Ventilation is such fun. Fan motor, pulley belt, louver seal, thermostat. Check to be sure they run. Flow the fuel. Propane quenches fire's thirst. Cucumber. Purge the fuel line first. No, your flame. Stable blue burns clean and long. Yellow flame, wobbly flame, yellow flame, wobbly flame is a sign there's something wrong. Grow your starts early in the house. Tomato. Clear the nest left by the mouse. Pros cost coin, especially in emergencies. Certified expertise, training, experience. Sometimes a pro means ease. No more singing. Chris, we've had enough. Web browser. go.uvm.edu/heater safety. All right, that's all I got. Hopefully that was not too painful, and hopefully we haven't lost any attendees, Julie. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Julie Rubaud from Red Wagon Plants in Hinesburg. And Julie's been kind enough to volunteer to walk us through her approach to starting up the season and greenhouse planning and management. And with that, Julie, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was amazing. It's hard to go from that to talking about databases, which I'm about to do. So if anyone else wants to leave, this is your time to get away. I'm going to share my screen. I put together a PowerPoint about databases. I also want to say I have two puppies in my office with me today, and they're both 1 year old. And if anything gets out of hand, I might just disappear out of the frame for a second. So today we're going to talk about planning the season. We have a bedding plant business primarily. That's the bulk of our operation. We have 12 greenhouses in Hinesburg, and our makeup of wholesale to retail is about 70-30. We also do events, classes, community-based events so people can rent out our space. And we grow an acre of culinary herbs for the off-season. And we also do value-added products with those herbs. And there's a new building that we just built this fall that you can see over here on the right side of the screen. We just moved in at the end of November. And that's a place where we're doing more of our classes. We're hopefully having like coffee and pastries on the weekends. And we have a nice office to do all this planning work that we do. We make 85% of our plant sales in 3 weeks. So it takes us 49 weeks to get ready for those 3 weeks. It's a huge undertaking. And we grow about over 1,200 varieties of plants if you're counting by cultivar. And the bulk of our wholesale business is vegetable and herb starts, but our retail has all the perennials, all the annuals, succulents, all the kind of ornamental plants too. So ton of planning. And that's what, this webinar is kind of more about the planning side of things, not so much the growing side of things. So I'm approaching it by talking about the calendar and also talking about tools. And the tools we use are helping us go from this, which is, in the dead of winter, to this. And that's like on opening day last year. And also this is our workstation. We go from that to that. So it's really 0 to 60. That greenhouse, this one is our propagation house. And it fills up within just a matter of days with plug trays and plugs that we're buying in for vegetative propagation plants like fancy petunias and fancy geraniums and things like that. So it's a ton of work to get up and going and have this, happen for such a short season. Our retail season is open a little longer. We go all the way through August, but the bulk of the sales happen in May during that 3-week period between Mother's Day and Memorial Day. The tools we use for all that planning are a database, which I think is probably our most helpful tool for the actual crop planning and the scheduling. And we use journals where we write by hand. We use, apps on our phone. We use a special notebook that's just for talking about varieties. We use photos on our phone. I'm sure you're all doing these types of things, but I wanted to get it all down in one place and really show you guys all the different tools we use. We use Google Drive for our whole team. We have weekly meetings that we take notes that is just one running document. So we can scan that document and go back a couple years and read minutes from those meetings. And that's a great place to scan during the planning season to see, are there changes we wanted to make? Because it's like a gold mine. So we're always harvesting data, during those planning months. And then we have one-on-one meetings with our managers. I meet one-on-one with our retail manager, our production manager, and our buildings and grounds guy. And then we also use Trello and Airtable a little bit. They're also databases, but we don't use those for crop planning. We use them more for workflow and project planning. So the database is really the meat of our crop planning. It's called FileMaker Pro. And every plant that we grow has a record. So in this database right now, there's 2,559 plant records. So every plant has this layout where the plant name is there, the variety, the plant categories, they're all listed right here, the vendor that we get the seed from or that we buy the cutting from, and then the propagation method. And the reason we have these as our categories of like the information we track on each thing is that we can then search the entire database by any of those terms. So if I want to know what seeds I'm ordering from Johnny's, I can just do a search of Johnny's seeds and I'll get a record of all the seed, anything that was grown from seed from Johnny's, you know, last year, for example. So a database is something you can search using certain search terms, and it really helps you take a ton of data and funnel it, filter it so that it's useful. Within each plant record is a weekly schedule of what we're planting and when. So all this work happens in the winter time. For example, with this basil, this Peace 2 basil, we're seeding 2 plug trays on the week of February 26th. And then those plug trays are going to get turned into a 4-inch pot, or it's a 3.5-inch pot on the week of March 25th. And we're going to make 10 of those trays. So this is where we just like keep track of everything and for every single plant. And I'm going to go into a little more detail about this database in a second. Okay, so here's just another record. It's the cabbage, same thing. But now I want to dig deeper into why I love this database. I've had it let's see, I've been growing here as Red Wagon for almost 20 years. And I think this database was created because I was using Excel, and it's really easy to make mistakes in Excel. You can transfer columns and rows wrong, and all of a sudden the whole thing's broken and you can't figure out your mistake. You can't make that type of mistake in a database. And I asked around, I asked Andy Jones what he used, and he recommended FileMaker Pro, Andy from Intervale Community Farm. And I just hired someone to build out the database of my dreams. I explained to this programmer exactly what I wanted it to do, and he did it. And it cost a lot of money at the time. It was maybe like 16 years ago, and it cost like $5,000, which I thought was a crazy amount of money, but it has just completely paid for itself in that time. I can't imagine living without it. So I'm just going to take you through kind of the steps of how we use it. So here's type of nasturtium we grow. These are all the weeks that we grow it, what we're going to do with it on those weeks. And then we also have a tab. So it's almost like every plant record is like a 3-ring notebook with different sections. So this tab is all the attributes. So when we go to our retail greenhouse to make a sign for that plant, we have all the attributes in one place. So it's really easy to delegate the sign making. And then we have plant descriptions, so we can just copy and paste that into our website, into our plant signs. We have inventory for all the seeds. So when we do our seed inventory in the fall, we zero out the number that would be in here. And then we, figure out based on how much we're planting the following year, how much to order. So everything just lives in one place. It's super, super convenient, and information doesn't get lost. You don't have to click through a million tabs on a really huge Excel sheet or spreadsheet to find out what you're doing. And then all those plant records have weeks associated with them. So like all these weeks right here get turned into a record that's organized by the week itself. So on the week of 2/26, this is everything we're doing that week. And then I can click down here on this button that says production schedule, and it prints out in big fat fonts, like everything we're doing that week. And these are, I have a little show and tell. We print out all the folders for, I have a blurred background, so you can't see it, but all the folders for every single week. So this is the folder for week 9. Everything we need to know about week 9 lives in that folder. So it's just like a holding place for our whole production team to know everything that's happening that week. If we have a special order that has to get seeded, it goes on a separate type of paper in there. If we have invoices from seed orders that are coming in or plug orders, they go in that week. So every week, our production manager grabs the folder and she knows exactly what's happening. I don't have to, nothing's in my head. Everything's on paper, nothing's in her head. And then they have a system for like checking off as they go down each crop and do whatever that crop needs. I hope you guys think this is exciting. I'm like so jazzed up by our weekly folders in our database. It just makes everything simple. And there's just no way we could keep everything organized, you know, without a system like this. There's just, we do way too many types of plants to keep it organized in Excel. We also use the folders as just like a place to write notes. So say like we had a crop failure on something, or the heater broke, or we filled up a greenhouse earlier than usual, or whatever, we just write it right on that folder. And later in the winter, when we have time, we take all those notes and put them in the database. There's a section for notes for every single plant. And then we have other places where we might write notes that have to do about maintenance or things like that. So it's just a holding place for everything during that peak season when we're too busy to like, you know, go to the computer and write something down. We're super analog and just use pen and paper, and have found that system works best for us. And we experimented a lot with turning everything on iPads and like keeping things like so they could look things up, you know, in the greenhouse on iPads and digitizing everything. And we just decided we didn't like that. That didn't work for us. We found that paper and pen just reduced all the barriers to entry, and we're able to get better data by just using paper and pen. But everyone's different. That's just what works for us. So a pro tip for doing greenhouse planning and crop scheduling is to use week numbers. If you're not already doing this, please switch over to this. Instead of using dates, you just say week 1, week 2, week 3, and it makes your life so much easier. You can compare year to year without looking up dates on a calendar. Like, I know we always do our hanging baskets week 12 and week 16, and we always start our first batch of tomatoes. Sorry, I don't know where my phone is, but it's ringing. You know, so there's certain things we always do on certain weeks, and I just never have to remember dates. It's super, super handy. And we start planning for the season in April of the previous season. So as soon as plants start becoming sellable, which for us is April, our season's really short, we start taking notes on those plants. So in the variety notebook, which lives in our retail greenhouse, anyone can write things down in this notebook, and it's organized alphabetically. So, you know, every year I make notes on pansies. Like, that's one of the first things I make notes on. And I just go to the P section and I give every pansy variety a grade, you know, like A to F. And that way I know not to reorder those pansies that got Fs or C minuses or, you know, whatever. So all that data gets collected in real time really quickly. And again, it's like keeping those pens and notebooks like in places where people are actually going to use them is super important. So during the season, it's not like we just blindly look at the database and say, oh, we have to pot up, you know, the purple basil this week. Sarah, our production manager, actually goes through the house. She pulls all the plug trays that are ready to get potted up, because they go from most things that we seed go from a plug tray to either a 4-pack or a 4-inch pot. She organizes all those trays on these white Metro shelves, and then anyone can follow along on the production team. So people who are potting up, they know there's a certain order the trays are laid out on those shelves. They know where to grab. The tags are right with them, because every plant we grow has a tag in it to make it, you know, shoppable for our customers. And the production team just has a system that they just follow. And the database is there to tell them numbers, but it's not, if something's like not ready because it's been gray all March, we don't seed it. We don't pot it up just because the database says it. We just wait till the following week. So we keep a few weeks of those folders in the production area so that they can refer to the week before, the week after, and know what the numbers are for each plug tray that's getting potted up. So when Sarah's walking through the greenhouse, she's looking at all the plug trays. Obviously that wouldn't be ready to pot up. That's not quite ready either. Like, we usually wait till basil's about that size to pot it up. So she's going through and like harvesting all the ready plug trays and organizing them each day or each week, depending on how big the week is. And then we pot them up. And then these are actually basil that, you know, herb plugs that we had too many of. So I was just using this photo, just remind myself to talk to you about if we have too much of something, it's really important we write that down too. So like that week, we had these 3 extra, plug trays that were partially used. My numbers were a little off. So we made sure to write that down in that week's folder. So it would get back into the database in the wintertime when we have time to transfer that information to where we really need it. Okay, so that was the tools we use. We also use like checklists for work plans, and we use, lots of other, like I was mentioning earlier, but that's like the bulk of the database. And then in June, it's when we start like really scheduling the plants for next year. So our database actually, I don't know if you noticed, but there's like right now it says 2024 on one side and 2023 on the other. It flips over. So on June 1st, 2024 will be here and 2025 will be here in that block, and it's blank. And so we start scheduling in June for the following year. And that's because our memory's fresh. We have all the data from our notebooks and our customer feedback, and we just start scheduling right there and then. And then July through August is when we sort of really keep track of anything we've composted. So, or we had too much of, we donated it, we gave it away, we put it in our own gardens, like something that got super root bound, like this plant, this elderberry, that went in our garden, but we took a note of that before we planted it. So we knew like next year, adjust numbers. If we have too much of something, we need to grow less of it. So it's really important to keep track. This is my pro tip. In the heat of the season, when everything's super fast paced, if you want to be efficient and not overdo something or lose a sale because you didn't have enough of it, if you're at the farmer's market and you keep running out of, your whatever, your arugula, just have a really easy system that anyone working at the market can write down, like, oh, we keep selling out of arugula at 10 a.m., every market. That information might not make it all the way to the planning stages when you then go and map out, 2025 and how much arugula you're going to grow. So just keeping track of that, making it super simple, removing barriers for data and record keeping is really important. September is when we slow down a little bit, and I just make sure, like, before I go, I usually try to take a vacation in September, but I make sure I have in all my orders for next year's bare root perennials, vegetative annuals, herb cuttings that we don't grow ourselves, all our plastic trays and pots. September is a time where there's lots of early order discounts in the greenhouse industry. So I make sure to check in with all my vendors, see if there's anything new coming down the road that I need to know about. So I don't really go on vacation till that's all done, because that means, okay, the bare bones for next year are in place. We're not going to sell out of something because I didn't order it in time. October is when our staff really starts to meet and analyze the previous year, and start to strategize for the coming year. We have a shitstorm. That's just when we sit around and we do not give feedback or reply to anybody. We just literally just go around and say everything we wish had been different. It's just a place to dump out all the things that we didn't like about the season. And we don't try to fix it in that meeting. We don't even discuss it in that meeting. We just write it all down. And then over the winter, we start pulling from that shitstorm those minutes and creating work plans that will address those things, or talking about them in our one-on-one meetings and making a plan about how to address those things. And that's how we get a little better every year. And our systems improve every year, just because we really track all that and we take all our staff's feedback really seriously, and just have a great team on hand. We have a great team here that they all want to make everything better here. So every year we just get a little better because of that shitstorm. And so that turns into a fall work plan. We have more and more events in the fall. We're trying to bring in more of those customers that want to come in and learn how to make an herb wreath with dried herbs or fresh herbs, or learn how to make value-added products with herbs. We're doing our herb harvesting starts to really ramp up in October and November. So we are not in plant planning mode quite as much then. And we're just, keep doing inventory on all the tags, the signs, the seeds, everything we use to get counted before we can order it. And October is usually when we start doing that. And November is really just all about our herb farm for the most part. And then we pick away at some projects too. But when you grow culinary herbs, it's all about Thanksgiving. And so it balances out our plant business quite well. December's when we start really getting into the nitty-gritty of varieties. We tend to encourage everyone to do some professional development, go to workshops, do things, study. We order our potting soil from Vermont Compost. We just do a ton of research. We read gardening magazines. I pay people to look through gardening magazines because it's really important to always be thinking of new varieties, new garden design ideas to share with our customers, things like that. I try to finish programming and scheduling every single crop in December so that in January, everything starts to speed up. So we are, going through all our greenhouse startup checklists, which I'm not going to sing the song again, but boy, that was so good. We are checking our heaters, we're sanitizing our benches, we're making sure all our hydrants are working properly, we're fixing everything that's broken. And we're starting to put I go through the variety notebook one more time. I just flip through, I cross off every single comment in that variety notebook. If I cross it off, it means we either incorporated it into the following year's plan, or I cross it off or I put an X through it, and it means we're not doing that suggestion. We can't, grow pawpaws or whatever somebody wants. So that happens in January, and then the variety notebook gets like shut and put away. It is done. And then we use Google Sheets and Trello for a lot of our winter work plans. Those are really helpful tools that, I just give every task has a point person, it has a location or a department. And then we just work our way through those lists, like replacing landscape fabric. Some of those projects are quite big and require a lot of people. And then some are small. So we just are doing, all the fans, the racks, the tools, everything we use is getting fixed in January. Seeds are starting to come in. We keep them really organized by category. So like tomatoes, peppers, plant families really. But then we also break it down within that to the workflow. Like, is it getting seeded with the vacuum seeder? Are we seeding it with the vibro seeder, seeding it by hand? And so then when the seeder comes in, the person doing the seeding comes in to grab seeds, she can grab the bin that has all the things that are related to the process she is set up to do that day. And it makes seed, it makes it, even though sometimes you wonder why the beets are in there with the, the Ruby Streaks mustard, it's just because they have the same exact seeding method. Saves a lot of time to keep them organized that way. Then we have, signs, they're called bench cards for every single plant. So those are getting made in January. We're ordering any new signs that we need to have. Some we print in-house. We print tags for those weekly folders. So plug trays get a handmade, I thought I had some. We just have a thermal printer that prints on white plastic tags that go in the pots. And the plug trays, those are all pre-printed ahead of time. So it'll say, basil week 9, and there'll be 9 of those tags. That means we have to seed 9 trays of basil that week. We wouldn't seed that much basil that early. That was a bad example, but you get what I mean. So all those plug tray tags are printed ahead of time with the date and put in those weekly folders. So the person seeding has this visual. They don't need to pull out a spreadsheet or a clipboard. They just know how much they're seeding of everything. It's super easy to read and super visual. We're also in January ordering our IPM inputs. We order everything super early. One thing I hear newer growers about is complaining that, something is 6 weeks out, 8 weeks out. I think COVID trained us all to order early, but even before COVID, we would order incredibly early. Just it reduces the possibility for mistakes and just makes life a lot easier. February's where we start ramping up some of our marketing and our events and our workshops. I send out a newsletter. I start doing it a little more frequently. I take a break in the winter, and then we start seeding at the end of February, which is week 9. And we are hiring people for both retail. At that point, our production team's usually in place, but we start hiring for retail in February. And oh, sorry, that is a rogue photo that wasn't meant to be there. So the weekly schedules, which are right there in the folders, those get all printed this time of year ahead of time. It's just ready to go. And anything that is special orders, I've already talked about that. We include that in the folders. And then we start in February training our new production team. And some of that is these flags, which we're supposed to be on another slide. We use flags like a lot. And if you have not used flags, this works on vegetable farms, this works in greenhouse settings. Each flag means something. So for example, if I want a bunch of plants to go to retail out of a certain greenhouse, I'll walk through with orange flags and I'll put an orange flag in every single plant. That way anybody can restock retail by just going and grabbing those trays that have orange flags in them. And then as they're leaving the greenhouse with that trailer load of plants, they just put the orange flags back in their holder. Some of the flags mean it's a special order for our Gardener Supplies, our biggest wholesale account, and they are the only account that places pre-orders. So we'll go through and make sure their plants aren't getting sold to someone else ahead of time. So they get a certain color flag. We use, take these to the cold frame, take these out to the donation pile. They're not sellable. All kinds of, there's a code with every greenhouse has this setup. Every single greenhouse has a set of flags and then the code of what the flags mean. So all our systems are trainable, and we just make sure our systems are easy to use, and we're too busy to use too many words training people. So the fewer words needed. Maybe we'll start a song for these flags. The flags made it into a lot of these slides. They're that important. So also in February, we're training people on IPM. We scout every single week, every single greenhouse. We have a system for that. It's usually one person's job, and then during the super busy weeks, that person gets a helper. We also scout any trays that come in from outside sources. So when we're buying in those vegetative plugs of petunias or geraniums or whatever we're not producing from seed ourselves, we make sure that those are scouted when they come out of the box, and they also get dipped in a combination of root shield. I think it's just root shield at this point. So that they're inoculated. We used to use Pyganic, but I don't think we use that anymore. And then if anything has a pest on it from an outside greenhouse, it gets secluded in a screen little shelf, like we call it the hospital zone. It's all screened in with Protect netting, so nothing can get out, and that will get treated usually with some kind of organic spray, or we'll just monitor it, or we'll put some beneficials in there. And we release beneficials weekly. Some are on a schedule and some we order on the fly based on any problem we might be having, which aren't too many. Our IPM team is just incredible, and they've just done such a good job of keeping pest problems down at this point. And then we train people on microclimates in the greenhouse. So our whole production team is responsible for doing all the work in the production area, but then the plants get pushed out into other greenhouses. And, we have to train people on, well, right next to the, the plastic is really cold, in the aisle is really warm. So don't put begonias or basil, right up against the plastic. So every greenhouse has a microclimate. And I think the key to being a successful greenhouse grower is understanding your microclimates and putting the right plant in the right spot, sometimes rotating plants, sometimes moving trays around. It's very important to really know what plant likes to go where. So even in a veggie system, if you're growing basil or tomatoes, you're always going to have an ideal spot in your greenhouse to put those plants versus lettuce or some other, broccoli or something. And then we're training new people to water in February, which is really hard because the sun's not usually out much, and it's very hard to train people to water on gray days. So that ends up going into March and sometimes April as well. I don't know what time it is. I'm just gonna leave it. Oh, good. Okay. Sorry. April's when we start to just like take off. So this is Eric, who was our delivery person for a very long time. And plants start going out the door in April, and we're still in production mode. Retail starting up April 12th this year is when we open, and wholesale's happening. We're setting up. We have plant racks in front of stores where we sell our plants, and we manage that inventory and merchandise the plants and go back 3 or 4 times a week, depending on the store. So we start putting out the plant racks in April, and we're not in planning mode April and May. We're just trying to survive. And yeah, I think there's just a couple more pictures left. So I just had that picture of that kale seedling because that's exactly what we're trying to go for. Every single plant that goes out the door should have that amount of roots, you know, growing through the plant, root ball. It shouldn't be root bound. It shouldn't just have 1 or 2 white roots at the bottom. That's a perfect plant that's going to go out into someone's garden with this huge amount of potting soil from Carl at Vermont Compost. You know, we're adding like all this fertility to people's gardens just by having these really healthy 4-packs with, you know, gorgeous soil in them. And to have, you know, however many varieties we have every year, I think like, you know, 1,100, 1,400, I don't know. But to schedule that, and like kale might have 20 generations in a season, we have 4 kinds of kale. So that's, you know, 80 times we have to get that kale timing just right. And I take great pride in the fact that usually as we're pulling the last tray of like the winter boar kale, the next generation's ready. You know, it's like the timing, and it looks just like that one. And our customers never know, like they don't think about that generations. They just want to get that one plant that's that perfect size. So the timing for us is just huge. And we have these signs throughout all the greenhouses that, so anyone who's loading the truck or restocking retail knows which generation to take. And they don't go and grab like a slightly younger generation. And yeah, and we're making those flowery containers during that time of year. It's a lot of that. It's overwhelming. But I know I just gave a lot of information about, you know, how we do things, and I have no sense of like who's here in this webinar and if I'm giving like way too much detail or not. But if you're a newer grower or you want to improve like how you do things in terms of planning your crops, I think my advice is to just like kind of break it down and think first about what customers you're serving. When do they want things? How much do they want of things? And just count backwards. And that nudgy part of like counting backwards, figuring out tray quantities, seed quantities, that's where I think the beauty of a really good database is. And it can be a ton of work to set it up at first, but our losses just went down. Once we really got in a groove with our database and our planning, our compost pile like shrunk by so much, because all that was in our compost were plants we couldn't sell or couldn't donate. Like, you know, we give away a ton of plants to school gardens, but once our planning got really good, our compost like became just a very small manageable thing that I don't feel like we're losing a lot anymore. And then use week numbers. Like, so if the beauty of week numbers is that, like, I know basil needs 3 weeks in its plug tray, and then it needs about 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks in its 4-inch pot before we can sell it. So I think like, oh, I definitely want, you know, I need 90 trays of basil at the end of May, that last week of May. Then I just think back, you know, how many weeks is that? And it's just a simple like minus. I don't have to pull out my calendar and count the weeks, you know, visually with my finger or anything like that. So using week numbers is just a really good habit to have if you don't already have it. And then having just a nice workspace. We just built this building. We're incredibly spoiled. We've been in an unheated dairy barn all these years, and now but it doesn't really matter what the workspace looks like or that it's brand new. It's just having an organized workspace and having not too much chaos in your life and in the places where you're doing that planning. I guess that's my advice, is to get certain, you know, make it appealing to do that planning work. It saves money, it saves headaches, and you do not want more decisions in the heat of the season. So it's all about reducing decision-making fatigue during those really busy parts of the season. I think that's my last slide. Yeah. Oh, May. Okay. Well, I think that was it. In May, we're just selling. I mean, there's just no planning happening, and we're hustling. We're pushing those big carts of plants around. And we also have golf carts. Golf carts are amazing. Every time I do a webinar, I just talk about how great golf carts are. I don't know why veggie farms don't use golf carts more. They're cheap. They can pull huge trailers full of plants. It's like a horticulture industry tip that I think a lot of veggie farms would benefit from. We pulled big double-decker steel trailers with our golf carts, with lots and lots of plants on them. I think that's all I had.
I think that's great, Julie.
Okay. I wanted to leave enough time for discussion. I hope
Thanks.
I
Yeah,
did.
if
Oh yeah,
questions come up that you want to use a slide for, yeah, no problem. That's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing so openly with all of us. Let's see, are there any questions? Anybody? First question is, can we get a copy of the great slides?
I think it's recorded, right? So, okay.
Yeah, we
Yeah, I
post both.
probably just the recording. I'm not going to send out a copy of the slides personally.
Another question, where did you get that cart, the plant moving cart? Maybe I think in the last photo.
Oh yeah, those are incredible. Unfortunately, they're not manufactured anymore. Griffin's used to carry them, Griffin's Greenhouse Supply. And now we get our carts, they're an aluminum, like extruded metal cart. They're not green like that. They're not as good. They don't steer as well. They don't have room for as many plants. And I think we get those from either VRE Systems out of Ontario or Toronto. I can't, or maybe Toronto's in Ontario. I don't know, Canada somewhere. Or Polytex. There's two kind of greenhouse related industry companies that we deal with that sell, you know, like, yeah, displays and merchandising stuff and plant moving racks. So VRE Systems and Polytex.
Hi, Julie.
Hi,
And
Carl.
everyone. Weeks. Duh. No, I'm sorry. There are 52 of them and they're symmetrical. The month thing is, yeah.
You know,
I could have lived a very different life if you'd shared this a little earlier.
Yeah, I know, right? And it's like common in manufacturing. It's common in the horticulture industry.
Hello.
Everyone talks about weeks in the horticulture industry. People don't use dates that much. And it was one of those aha moments because I went from being a veggie farmer to this, or I used to do both, but I was like, oh, wow, that makes so much sense. So week numbers are really great. And I love that. I know that VVVGA is doing more with VNLA, which is the Nursery and Landscape Association. I think there's so much good knowledge to share between the two organizations. And because I went from veggies to this, I can sort of see both worlds, and it's really cool. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to mute again, but thank you for reminding us of all that.
Vern?
Hey, thanks, Julie. That was really so great and information rich. You briefly mentioned water testing in there, and I'd just like to hear more about what water are you testing? I assume it's your irrigation, and what do you test for, and where do you have it done?
I think it's I was just like looking through our calendar because we have reminders in there of like things we do every year, like once or twice a year. And we actually just water test just for E. coli, just for like cons for caps. And then for NOFA, you know, so we just make sure it's just like one of those things we tick off. It's on our checklist in the winter of things to do. We should, if we were better greenhouse growers, we should be testing our pH way more often. And like certain crops, ornamental like annuals, want really acidified water. We don't do that, but we do have a pH meter. We actually brought it out of its box this past week, and maybe we'll become better growers and use it. I have you know, shout out to Carl. We only use Vermont compost for our potting soil, and it just seems to, whatever we put in it is happy. So we haven't gone that route of acidifying the soil because most things are happy. And if they're not, I just stop growing it because I don't really want to futz around that much. So that's like the water testing we do is just for E. coli, really.
Probably a good idea to do a formal greenhouse irrigation test. I think Penn State, it's like $40 or something, but not just pH, you get carbonates, you get some important micronutrients, iron, and part of it is a baseline when everything's going well, but if something goes sideways, you'll have that data.
Yeah, that's great. Now is pH, from what I understand, it can change a lot, like, right? Don't people who really test for pH do it kind of weekly, or do you know?
I think that's more an unbuffered growing media, so probably not
Okay,
as essential in that big ball of compost.
got it.
And I
Julie,
would just say that the pH can be very motile in media, that's where plants are growing. It can change a lot in days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
So-
that's why we haven't started, because I'm kind of like, I think like pH, I think of pH testing for greenhouses as like something that the real commercial, like industrial, not organic people do, because they're growing in a sterile media, they're feeding a soluble fertilizer, and they're adding so many inputs that they want to tweak all the time. And we're just not that kind of grower. You know, we grow bedding plants as if we were vegetable growers. We use the same methods that I used as a veggie grower, which is just use good soil, bump things up, you know, into bigger pots or into the ground or for your fertility management. And we don't use really any soluble fertilizer.
we have 3 additional questions or comments in the chat. The first one is, what is your heating system? Propane, oil, mix, something else?
Yeah, we started out with propane, but then natural gas came down the road. So we've converted all our houses to natural gas. And we did have one problem with that. 2 of our heaters, which were not just like Modine, they were LB White, like they were made for greenhouses. They were non-venting heaters. Those did not transition over to natural gas. So we put the kits in, you know, there's kits that you change out to go from propane to natural gas. We did it in all the heaters, including those. And they just burned really dirty. And we had ethylene poisoning and lost 2 greenhouses worth of plants to ethylene poisoning. And it was a drag. We had an insurance claim that year, and we got some money from LB White. We got some money from the insurance. Clausen's loaned us their ethylene meter, which was really nice. They're a huge greenhouse business in Colchester. And I would say like the greenhouse industry around here is really friendly and wants to help everybody out. And we've definitely benefited from that. But we lost 2 greenhouses full of plants. They turned black.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember talking with you at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was natural gas is what we have now. And I love it. I never have to worry about the tank being empty. There's never a problem.
Well, we were talking prior to the start of the webinar about how a previous webinar attendee really appreciated hearing your thoughts on watering, and the next question will get us there. So any tips on watering and training staff to water?
I may be the wrong person to ask this question to, because I'm so controlling about watering. I, for so many years, would only let like one other person water besides me. And this year, after 28 years of growing, is the first year I am not on the watering schedule. And I am finally letting go a little bit, but I'm going to be still the trainer. I think it's like train someone to water. You have to give them the same greenhouse, and you have to have them water like 3 to 4 days in a row during like a 3-week period. And they cannot learn to water properly if they're watering different houses or they're not doing sequential days in a row, because they never see the result of what their work is, or how fast the plants drink and how that changes as the plants grow and the weather changes. So that's my number one tip, is like, you just assign a house to someone and make sure their schedule isn't like every other day. You can't learn to water if you're watering every other day. You can keep plants alive, you know, and not kill them, but you're not helping those plants thrive. And I think the amount of water that people use is often too much. And people don't pay attention to all those micro zones where things are drying out or things are not drying out. So it's just learning to observe those zones, like close to your vent or your roll up sides, it's always going to dry out more. And you know, the sizes of the plants, and then the plant families, like a begonia versus a lettuce. You know, I mean, the lettuce can just drink all day. The begonia will drown in 2 seconds if you look at it, you know, a second too long with the hose. So and I train people to water by making them watch me water one entire greenhouse, which is, that's such a snore fest, and it's painful, it's awkward for everyone, but I just kind of talk out loud as I'm watering and why I'm doing things. I use terms like, it's a light spring rain, it's, you know, dew in the desert at night, it's a torrential downpour, you know, because there's different, amounts of water different plants want. So it's like using words in the same terms and demonstrating what that means. Like if I have a whole bench of thyme and lavender, I'm just going to run that wand really quickly over that bench with my hand really up high in the air. If I'm feeding, tomatoes that are 18 inches tall, my wand is like underneath all that foliage, like getting in there and wiggling around. So things like that, like making people follow you around and then watching them water, which is that's the hardest. Like I will watch them water like 2 benches, and then I have to walk away because I want to micromanage every little move they're making. And no one likes that, including me. And so I usually will just walk through their house after they've watered, as long as I can trust they're not going to overwater. Once soil, especially compost-based soil, is overwatered, it's incredibly hard to dry it out, especially in the beginning of the year when we have a lot of gray days. And you can literally ruin an entire greenhouse with just one overwatering. I think ruin it. Maybe that's a big word. It takes a while for those plants to bounce back. You can lose a week of growth, of good growth, by overwatering.
They might get a flag out of that.
They're gonna wear that flag and tape it to their head.
So Jack is pointing out, in addition to knowing water pH, important to know alkalinity as well. Jack, do you want to say anything about that this week, or save it for next week? Leave them hanging, or Vern, or anybody else. Maybe we'll come back to that next week.
I'm like kind of so dumb, I don't even know the difference. To me, that sounds like the same thing. Is that 2 different things?
Jack says save it. Vern, something quick.
Well, just real quick, it's the carbonates. It's how hard it's going to be to change the pH.
Got it. Okay.
The question about the specific houses you're using, and any big reasons you are using Harnois instead of Rimmel or others?
I like the Arnois because a bunch of reasons. They have a oval shaped tube, so they're extra strong. And we have never had a bow bend in wind or snow or anything. The only time we've had a bow bend is when someone's hit it with a tractor. And we've never lost anything to wind other than some old polycarbonate end walls out of like rotted wooden studs, which wasn't the fault of the Arnois. The arches are 6 feet apart instead of 4. So that's a little more light, a little less hardware. And they're tall. I mean, I know you can get a Rimmel or a Ledgewood with taller ground posts, but the height of the Arnois just means we have great airflow and great light quality. And airflow is so important when you're growing a dense mixture of plants, like airflow, and you're organic, like that's our tool for, controlling diseases is airflow. So the roll-up sides go, like almost 6 feet. And I like how easy they are to build. I like that they're engineered. And every year it seems like they come out with some little tweaks that, improves the design. I like the manual that comes with them. I like the people. They answer all your questions really quickly. The price point I think is fantastic for the quality that you get. And there's never a single missing part. I love Ledgewoods. If I were just a grower in the ground using, tunnels just for veggies, I would probably just do Ledgewoods. But for growing on benches and growing, higher value crops, I think Arnois are the way to go.
Thanks. Next question is briefly, what beneficial insects are just scheduled, ordered regardless of scouting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do Aphidius colemanni on a schedule, and we start out with banker plants that come in, I think like this week or next week. They come in quite early, like week 7. So that's usually barley grass that has been inoculated with a type of aphid that only likes grasses. And we plant that barley grass that has that aphid on it in a bunch of different big pots. And then we put like a hairnet over it. And we let that grass grow out. And then we get in little vials of Aphidius colemanni, which is a little wasp that lays its egg inside aphids. And we empty the vials inside those banker plant like hairnets. and the Ophidius colmani go in there and they lay their eggs inside all those aphids, and then they make more babies. And then we take those hanging baskets, we put them in hanging baskets. It can be in any container, and we hang them throughout all our greenhouses. So we have these little farms of Ophidius colmani that we, put out into the world. So those are all on a pre-schedule, and then we get Ophidius colmani throughout the season. I think that's the only one we have on a schedule, actually, because we have had times, even pre-COVID, where they weren't available, and that was a real drag. So I know the Ophidius colmani is on a pre-schedule. Oh, when I was talking about that dip that we put plugs that come in from outside greenhouses, it's root shield, and it's a nematode, a beneficial nematode that eats like the larva of fungus gnats. So it's like Nemesis or Nemashield is the trade name. I forget. One's like OMRI approved and one's not, so I forget which is which. So we order that also on a pre-schedule, and then other things we'll order on the fly. And we make those banker plants also in successions. Like they have a record in our database. So we're always refreshing new banker plants. And we also are selling banker plants. If anyone wants us to grow banker plants that are inoculated with the Ophidius colmani and the grass aphids, we'll sell them that whole pot with the hairnet on it. We do that for new farms for New Americans in the Intervale.
Fantastic. I will ask a question. I'm guessing that not everybody you have employed geeks out on databases and flags. And I'm curious about, the sort of personnel side of this, and, are the people that really lean in on it, and others that don't, and how you manage differences like that?
Well, the database management is really spread out between myself and two other people. And I think it's just the two of us that really like go in there and program stuff. I do actually the bulk of the programming, but then they fine tune and they enter data and things like that. They love it because they realize what a great tool it is. I also hire people that think like me, I think. We have a lot of very quality conscious, people that don't want to do extra work. And that's who like our managers are that work here, who they then teach the seasonal people. So we have 5 people who are year round, 2 are full-time year round, and the others are part-time in the winter. And all those people who are year round love our systems because they realize it saves a ton of time, and no one has to ask me. Like we wear radios, we wear walkie-talkies because it's a pretty big property. That's another tip. I would just like, if you have employees, just get walkie-talkies. It's such a lifesaver. No one radios me anymore during the season. And I like, I just like sometimes stop carrying it because they can answer all the questions now because it's all on paper. It's all like, it's not in anyone's heads anymore.
An impressive system, Julie. Thanks for sharing it with us.
I hope it's not too geeky, but if anyone wants more information on FileMaker Pro or our particular system, I'd be happy to set up like a one-on-one.
If anything's nobody should ever ask me if anything's too geeky. We'll leave it at that. I think that's our session. We're at 1 o'clock. I don't see any additional questions coming in. And with that, I'll just remind everybody, same time, same place next week, 1 o'clock. 12 o'clock, and Jack Mannix will be with us, hosted by Vern Grubinger. See you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.